200 miles from any ocean, a light is burning at the top of a hill. No boat has ever needed it. No coastline waits below. And yet there it stands, a lighthouse full and impossible, rising straight up out of the roof of a house the whole town has learned to walk past without looking. Because something was sealed inside that tower. Something with a name nobody said out loud for 60 years. Wide over the valley, first rooftops, church steeple, a water tower going quiet gold in the last light. Then closer, a gate hanging crooked on one hinge. A window boarded except for one pane clean, catching the sun like it's been waiting. Then closer still, a hand young, scarred at the knuckles, closes around an old brass key. Somewhere behind that door, a ledger, a staircase that shouldn't exist. Names nobody in this town has spoken since they stopped being brave enough to climb the hill. The key turns. The gavel was still ringing when Junie Hartwell raised her hand. $15 would have gotten her a bus ticket. 20 got her a house nobody wanted. She didn't know that yet. She just knew her hand was up, and it stayed up, because that's the thing about having nothing. You stop being afraid of losing it. 2 garbage bags. That was the sum total of 18 years. 1 bag of clothes, 1 bag of a sleeping roll, a few paperback books gone soft at the corners, and a canvas tool wrap she had not let go of since she was 12 years old. Not once. Not through 4 different houses. Not through the years she slept with it under her pillow, because a boy in that house liked to go through things that weren't his. The caseworker had a folder. The folder had her whole life in it, and it was thin. Painfully thin for 18 years. "You turned 18 Tuesday," the woman said. Like that explained everything. Like a birthday was a door slamming. "I know what Tuesday means," Junie said. The woman slid a paper across the desk. A list of shelters. "This one on 3rd has beds for women under 25. Call by 4. Junie folded the paper without looking at it. She already knew the shelter on 3rd. She'd called it before. Everyone in the system knew the shelter on 3rd. "That's it?" the woman asked, watching her stand, watching her gather 2 black bags like they weighed nothing. "That's it?" No tears. She'd used hers up years ago on people who never once changed a decision on a desk because of them. Crying was a currency, and it didn't spend here. She'd learned to work instead. That was Silas Boone's doing. She was 12 when the state put her with him. A widower. 3 streets back from the rail yard, in a garage that smelled like linseed oil and cut pine, and something underneath that she never had a word for until years later. Patience, maybe. That's what patience smells like. He didn't talk to her the first week. Not one word beyond passing the salt. Then on a Saturday, he set a wrecked side table in front of her. Veneer peeling. 1 leg cracked clean through. Water rings bloomed across the top like a disease had gotten into the wood itself. "You know what's wrong with it?" he asked. Everything she'd said. He'd almost smiled. Almost. "Nothing's wrong with it that hands can't fix." And he put a scraper in her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, like handing a kid a spoon. For 2 years, she scraped and sanded and read grain like other kids read faces. Silas gave her his second best plane, then his best one. Stop calling it his at all. The garage was the first room she ever walked into and felt it get easier, not harder, easier. Then one morning he didn't come out for breakfast. His heart, the paramedic said. Like that was a full sentence. Like that explained a man being gone. A different caseworker, a different folder, a group home across the county before the funeral was even in the ground. Nobody asked her about the table she'd been fixing. She never found out what happened to it. She kept the plane, though. Through every house after that, the tool roll traveled where she traveled. Steel cold and honest in her hands when nothing else made a lick of sense. So she knew how to fix things. She just had nothing left worth fixing, and nowhere to do it. Until the library. Warm, free. No ID required to sit in a chair and read. She spent 3 days there. Job listings she had no address to apply from. Corkboard by the returns desk. lost cat flyer, quilting circle notice, and between them one sheet from the county, public auction, tax delinquent properties, Thursday, 10 a.m. She wasn't sure why she went. Maybe because the annex was warm too. Maybe because a person who owns nothing likes to sit in a room where things change hands, on the chance that one of them might change toward her for once. 20 folding chairs, men with the boredom of regulars, a couple of good coats scattered in with the rest. Money looking to make more money. The auctioneer moved fast. A flooded duplex, a weed lot behind the gas station. Then he paused, and the pause was what made her look up. Parcel 41-9, he said. Some of you know it. A ripple of laughter went through the room. The kind of laugh a room's made before. Many times. House on Quarry Street, he went on. 2 stories plus. He checked his sheet like he didn't quite believe it himself. Plus the tower. Sits on a double lot. Condition listed as poor. Sold as is. Where is? County takes no responsibility. Takes no responsibility is right, a man near the front called out, and that landed bigger than the auctioneer's own joke. A woman a few chairs over leaned toward her neighbor. That's the Lighthouse place. My boys won't walk past it after dark. The Lighthouse place. Junie didn't know yet what that meant. Not really. She pictured something small. A cupola, maybe. A round window catching the light funny. She had no idea. We'll open at 20, the auctioneer said, like he expected to take it back the second the words left his mouth. $20 just to start the failure. Just to get to the part where nobody bid and he moved on to the weed lot. Junie did the math before she decided to. 20 left her with 40 and change. A double lot. 2 stories of walls and floor and a roof that had at least kept 12 years of weather off whatever was inside. She thought about the shelter bed on 3rd. Call by 4, give it back by 7 the next morning. Every day. Forever. Until something else came along. Or didn't. She thought about Silas. Nothing's wrong with it that hands can't fix. Her arm went up. Slow. Steady. The same motion she used lifting a plane off wood at the end of a stroke so it wouldn't tear the grain. For a second, nobody saw it. Then the auctioneer did, and his face did something small and complicated. Got 20, he said, $20 from the young lady in back. He scanned the room out of habit. Do I hear 25? Nobody breathed to make it 25. A man in a good wool coat turned all the way around in his chair to look at her. His expression wasn't pity, it was closer to annoyance. Like she'd reached past him for the last seat on a bus he hadn't even wanted to get on until just now. Honey, the woman with the boy said, not unkindly, you don't want that house. 20 going once, the auctioneer said. Somebody laughed loud enough to carry. Let her have the ghost, she can charge admission. Going twice. Junie kept her arm where it was, eyes on the front of the room, calm, unhurried, the way Silas used to stand when a customer questioned his price. The gavel came down. Sold. The house on the hill to the young lady in back for $20. He shook his head as he wrote it in the ledger. The room broke into the low murmur that follows a person out a door. She paid at the clerk's window in 1s and a 5. The clerk, young careful tie, slid a deed across the counter, then a key on a loop of string, brass dark with age. He held on to the key a half-second longer than he needed to, like letting go of it might be a mistake. You know about that place, he said. It wasn't a question. I know it's mine now, Junie said, and folded the deed into her jacket and walked out before he could decide to warn her about anything at all. The road up was called Copper Ridge, and it climbed the east side of town in slow, tired stages. Houses got plainer the higher you went. Then the pavement gave out into cracked concrete, and the trees closed in on both sides like they were guarding something. 2 kids on bikes trailed her the last block, hanging back, daring each other closer. She rounded the last curve of Copper Ridge, and her feet stopped moving before her brain caught up with why. Because the lighthouse place wasn't a house with a cupola, it was a house with a lighthouse growing straight out of the roof. 3 full stories of Victorian bones turret gables, a wraparound porch sagging on one side, and then punching up out of the center of it like something had shoved its way through from underneath a tower. White stone, round, rising a full 4 stories past the roof line into the gray afternoon, straight and clean, and utterly out of place the way a lit match looks out of place on a dinner table. At the very top, a glassed gallery, a lantern room, the kind you'd see standing on a rock at the edge of an ocean. There was no ocean here. Millbrook Hollow was 200 miles from the nearest coastline in any direction. Junie knew that the way she knew her own birthday. And still, there it stood, a house wearing a lighthouse like a crown it had no right to. She'd seen pictures of houses and books at the library. She'd never seen anything like this. Nothing had prepared her for the scale of it, how small the porch looked at the base of that tower, how the whole structure seemed to lean into the sky like it was daring the sky to argue. One of the kids braked hard behind her. "You're not going in there." He couldn't have been more than 10. "It's mine," Junie told him. "I live here now." The two of them traded a look. "Nobody lives there," the girl said, almost gently, like she was correcting an adult who'd gotten a simple fact wrong. "There's a lady. My brother saw her in the tower window at night. She's been dead a long time." "That's a cat," Junie said. Neither of them looked like they believed her. They stood on their pedals and pushed off fast down the hill, and one of them yelled something over his shoulder that the wind took before it reached her. She stood at the broken gate a long moment, just looking. Because up close, the tower didn't look built onto the house, it looked built through it. Like the house had grown up around something that was already there. Stone at the base going gray-green with age, then lighter as it rose, then that gallery of glass at the very top, most of the panes intact, a few gone dark and jagged where weather had taken them. Everybody who looked at this house saw a haunted house. Junie stood at the gate and made herself see it the way Silas would have. A roof, bones, and whatever that tower was a problem to be solved, not a ghost to be feared. A movement in an upstairs window made her flinch anyway. She looked up in time to see a pale shape slip back into the dark. Low. Quick. Her heart went hard for 1 second. Then she understood the shape of it. A cat, big, black, watching her from behind the glass like she was the trespasser. The front steps held her weight. Barely. The key fought the lock, then gave. The door swung inward on a groan into gray light and cold ash and something faintly sweet underneath. Old paper, maybe. She stood on the threshold of the first thing she had ever owned and listened to the house be quiet around her. "Hello," she said. Felt foolish, said it anyway. Nothing answered. But somewhere above her, up not just deeper in, she heard something moving. Soft on bare boards. She went in. The hall opened into rooms gone to ruin the patient way empty houses go. Plaster down in sheets. A chandelier furred gray with cobweb. A staircase curving up into shadow. Banister good solid oak under all that grime. She could tell that much at a touch. She moved through slow, cataloging damage and worth at the same time. The habit so deep she didn't notice she was doing it. Wide plank floors, sound, old wavy glass in the windows that weren't boarded. Whoever built this place had built it to last past everyone who ever lived in it. It was in the back hall that she stopped. Because the back hall didn't make sense. A row of hooks at waist height, then a second row below it, lower, set at the height of a child, dozens of hooks, far more than one family would ever need. She turned, saw the door frame into what must have been a dining room. Paint scarred top to bottom with pencil marks. Little horizontal lines, each one with a date and a name in a different hand. The lowest a few feet off the floor, the highest over her head. She crouched, read the closest one, a name she couldn't make out. A date. Then another name, different year, a growth chart. Not for one child, for more children than she could count standing in one hallway. The kitchen was the size of a small restaurant's, a range built for cooking in quantity, a long scarred work table, shelves built for more plates than any single family owns. Junie stood in the middle of it, two garbage bags still in her hands, and felt the first real prickle of unease since the gate. Not because the house was frightening, because it wasn't. It felt under all the ruin like a place that had been full of people, and she could not work out who they had been, or where they'd gone, or why a house that had clearly held so many had been left to rot at the top of a hill while the town below crossed the street to avoid its shadow. She was still standing there when the cat came to find her. Black Tom, lean, ragged-eared, watching her with green eyes that held no fear at all. "I bought it," Junie told the cat. "Fair and square, $20. The cat turned and walked back into the hall, stopped, looked over its shoulder at her, waiting. She'd grown up around enough strays to know what that meant. She set the bags down, followed. It led her up the curving stairs, sure-footed where the boards had gone soft. Along the corridor on the second floor, past 3 bedroom doors. Then it stopped at the very end of the hall, at a stretch of wallpaper faded in a pattern of cabbage roses, and sat, and stared at the wall, and would not move. "There's nothing there," Junie said. The cat did not so much as flick an ear. She stopped looking at the cat then, started looking at the wall instead, at how the hallway ran, at the rooms she'd just passed, at the size of the house from the street, at that tower she'd seen from the gate rising up out of somewhere in this footprint. The hall ended too soon, she was sure of it. From outside, the second floor should have run clean into the base of the tower. From in here, it stopped a good 15 feet short, at a wall covered in cabbage roses, with a cat sitting in front of it like it had been waiting 12 years for somebody to come up and ask the right question. She pressed her palm flat against the paper, behind it, faint, cool, the draft of a space the rest of the house didn't know was there. The cat looked up at her, then back at the wall, patient as a clock. The light through the boarded windows had gone the color of ash. She had no lamp, no power, a single book of matches in her jacket pocket. And Silas's first rule had always been, you don't take a thing apart in the dark. Whatever was behind those roses had waited this long. It could wait until she could see what she was doing. She went back down to make herself a place to sleep on the floor of a house she owned. The cat stayed at the wall a while longer before it came down to find her. The first night she slept in her clothes on the parlor floor, zipped into the sleeping bag jacket bunched under her head. Silas's tool roll under her hand where she could reach it without looking. The cold came up through the boards. The house talked the whole night. Small sounds old houses make. A tick in the walls. A long sigh somewhere in a chimney she hadn't found yet. A loose board settling somewhere over her head. Twice she woke sure she'd heard footsteps. Both times it was the cat walking its rounds. Toward morning it came and lay against her spine. A warm weight, she let it stay. "You stay, you eat," she told it, the only deal she'd ever known how to offer anybody. The cat didn't argue. By the second day she'd started calling it boots for the white on its front paws, and because it slept curled in the dead fireplace like it belonged to the ash itself. She'd half expected to wake that first morning and talk herself right back out of it. A sensible person takes the shelter bed, waits for a real apartment to come along. But she'd woken in a house with her own name on a deed, the first roof that had ever been hers to keep or lose, and handing the key back to the county was the one thing she knew with total certainty she would not do. Whatever this house turned out to be, whatever that tower was, whatever waited behind those roses, it was hers now. She'd fix it, or go down with it. Morning came up gray and honest through the gaps in the boards. She walked the house with her hands. That was how Silas taught her to read a thing. Fingers, not eyes. Eyes lie. Wood doesn't. The plaster was a loss in most rooms. But plaster is just plaster. The bones were good, the big beams overhead dry and true. One bad spot in the roof over the back bedroom, where the sky showed through in a ragged coin of light. Rain had been getting in there for years. One place, though, and one place could be patched. She had $40 in change. She went down the hill to spend some of it. The town below Millbrook Hollow, its own name, painted fading on the water tower, had been built for more people than it currently held. Wide brick streets, tall storefronts, half of them dark. She passed a diner's steamed windows, her stomach saying something about it she chose to ignore, and kept walking until she found a low building on the edge of the old industrial blocks. Yard full of salvage doors and clawfoot tubs and reclaimed lumber gone silver with weather. A hand-painted sign, Reclaim. Under it, smaller hardware, Salvage, Odd Lots. A bell over the door announced her. Inside, it smelled of old iron and cut pine. A woman behind the counter looked up from a ledger. 60s, maybe. Broad-shouldered. Reading glasses shoved up into gray hair. Forearms that said she moved her own stock. Help you find something. I need a hasp and a padlock, Junie said. A tarp big enough for a roof patch. Lamp oil if you've got it. Whatever roofing cement comes cheapest. The woman set down her pen. That's a specific list from somebody I've never seen in here before. You working a job. My own place. I'm fixing it up. Where at? Junie had learned that the truth costs less in the long run. She paid it. The house on the hill, Quarry Street. I bought it at the county auction. The shop went quiet in a particular way. The woman looked at her over the tops of her glasses. A long moment. You bought the Reed place. She let out a breath, half laugh, half something older. Lord, somebody finally did. She came out from behind the counter, put out a square-collared hand. Thelma. I own this pile. Well, Junie. Thelma looked her over, the duffel of a life on her back, boots that had walked a long way. She didn't ask any of the questions a worse person would have. Come on, let's get your roof shut before dark. She loaded the cart herself. Junie noticed the prices she wrote down weren't the prices on the tags. A kerosene lantern she called a loaner. A coil of good rope she called scrap. When Junie tried to argue, Thelma waved her off. You're keeping the rain off the Reed house, she said. Far as I'm concerned, that makes you a customer for life. You can owe me. They carried it out to the yard together, and Junie asked because she had to ask somebody. What's the story on it? Everybody acts like I bought a grave. Thelma leaned against a stack of doors, folded her arms. Depends who you ask. Ask the county. It's a tax write-off. They couldn't give away. Ask the kids. There's a woman who walks the tower at night with a lamp. She paused. Ask me. I'll tell you the truth. Augusta Reed lived in that house near 60 years. Built that tower with her own money, her own hands half the time, and folks decided that was the strangest thing they'd ever heard of. A lighthouse, Junie said. 200 miles from any water. Why would anybody build that? Because she lost somebody to the water, Thelma said. Quiet now. Before she ever came to Millbrook Hollow. That's all anybody ever really knew. She came here already grieving something, and she built a light where there was no sea to need one. And she said once, just once, that I ever heard that as long as that light was burning, no child would ever be lost in the dark on her watch. Junie stood very still. She never turned a soul away, Thelma went on. Not once in 60 years. And this town decided that was the strangest thing on the block instead of the kindest. Her jaw tightened. I called it the only sane thing I ever saw happen on this hill. Augusta Reed, Junie said. That's who the key belonged to. That's who built it. Near enough. Thelma's eyes went somewhere else for a second. Folks saw her lamp in that tower window, her last years, and decided she was a ghost before she was even gone. Easier than asking after a lonely old woman, I suppose. Easier than climbing the hill. What did she do up there all those years? Thelma was quiet a moment. That, she said, is a longer story than your roof can wait for. You come back when the rain stopped. I'll feed you. Tell you some of it. She handed Junie the lantern. Go on, light's burning. You got somewhere to sleep up there. It wasn't quite a question. It's got walls and a roof now. That's more than I had on Tuesday. Thelma looked at her a long moment. Augusta would have liked you, she said finally. She had a soft spot for the ones who turned up with nothing and didn't ask for a thing. She shook her head slowly. Girls used to come and go from that house for years. Stay a while. Move on down the road. Nobody in this town ever asked where they came from or where they went. We were all too busy being scared of the light to be curious about it. Before Junie left, Thelma disappeared into the back and came out with a paper sack warm that turned out to hold half a sandwich and an apple. She didn't make a thing of it. Just put it in the cart. Eat while you work. You're all elbows. Junie climbed the hill with more than she'd come down with, and a strange tightness in her throat she didn't have a name for and didn't try to give one. She patched the roof that afternoon. Cold, ugly work balanced on the steep slope tarp, snapping in the wind, roofing cement, freezing on the trowel before she could spread it. But when she came down, the coin of open sky over the back bedroom was gone. The house was dry, for the first time in 12 years. She stood in the yard and looked up at her work and felt the specific, clean satisfaction of a thing that had been broken and now was not. Above the roof line, the tower stood watching over both of them. Her in the house. Boots watched from the windowsill. The next morning, she went at the front door. Swollen in its frame across a decade of wet winters, dragged so bad it wouldn't latch, which meant it wouldn't lock, which meant she might as well be sleeping in the yard. She took it off its hinges, laid it across two sawhorses made from porch rubble, unrolled the canvas tool roll. The block plane fit her hand like it had grown there. She set the iron fine, went to work down the swollen edge. The shavings came off in long curls that smelled like 100 years ago, and the rhythm of it emptied her head of everything but the wood. This was the one place she had always known exactly who she was, a girl with a sharp tool and a thing that needed mending. A while into it, she looked up and found she had an audience. Two kids at the broken gate, the same boy and girl who'd warned her off the first day, straddling their bikes, watching her work the plane. You really live here, the boy said. I really do. She blew the shavings off the door. You want to come see or you want to keep guessing from the road? They traded a look, the long, careful look of children deciding whether something's a trap. Then they let the bikes drop in the weeds and edged up the walk, stopping a safe distance from the steps. Is there really a ghost? The girl asked. There's a cat. His name's Boots. He's mean to mice and decent to me. She held up a long curl of wood shaving. Here, smells like 100 years ago. The boy took it like it might bite, then sniffed it. His whole face changed. Whoa. That tower, the girl said, craning her neck all the way back to look up at it. Why's it there? Houses don't have those. I don't know yet, Junie said. Honestly, I'm going to find out. They stayed 20 minutes. Peppering her with questions, she answered straight. When they pedaled off down the hill, they forgot to be afraid of the house at the top of it. It was a small thing, but small things were the only kind she'd ever had to give. She didn't notice the truck until the door of it shut, parked at her broken gate. A big, clean pickup that had never hauled anything heavier than golf clubs. The man coming up her walk was the man who turned around in his chair at the auction. Good wool coat, good boots that had never seen a job site. Looking up at the tower with the expression of a man doing arithmetic in his head. That's a lot of work for one person, he said. Pleasant, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. I'm Dalton Merrow. You're the young lady who surprised us all Thursday. Junie. She didn't stop planning. Did I take something of yours? He smiled, practiced, not entirely unkind. In a manner of speaking, my company's been putting this block back together for 3 years. Senior housing, a clinic, some retail. Good for the town. He spread his hands. This lot was the last piece. I'll be honest with you, I expected to pick it up cheap and quiet. You beat me to it. No hard feelings. He paused. In fact, I came up here to make your week. How's this? I'll buy it from you. Today. 10,000 cash. And I'll cover moving you anywhere in the county you want to go. He let the number sit, watched it land. You paid $20 for a condemned fire hazard with a tower nobody can explain, he said. I'm offering you 10,000 and a fresh start. That's not a negotiation. That's a gift. It was more money than Junie had ever seen in one place. For a second, the whole shape of an easier life opened up in front of her. A deposit on an apartment. A real bed. Heat that came from a thermostat instead of a wood stove she hadn't even built yet. She let herself look at it. Then she set the plane down on the door, looked at him instead. No, she said. Dalton blinked. People did not say no to him often. She could see that on him. I don't think you understand the position you're in, he said, and his voice stayed warm, but underneath it, the warmth had gone flat and level. That house has open code violations going back years. There are people at the county who've wanted that tower condemned since before you were born. Nobody could ever explain what it's even for structurally, and that makes people nervous. As the owner, that's your liability now, not the county's. I can make all of that disappear with a signature. Or I let it run its course, he said, and you find out what it costs a person with no money to fight a condemnation order. He took a card from his coat pocket, set it on the porch rail. Think about it overnight, he said. Don't think about it too long. He walked back down to his clean truck and drove away. Junie stood with the plane in her hand and looked at the white rectangle of his card on the rail. She did not pick it up. She found the notice taped to her gate the next morning. Calder County, it read across the top. Notice of unsafe structure. A date for a hearing 11 days out when the building inspector would recommend whether the structure should be repaired or demolished. It was the same county that had run the auction, the same clerk's window where she'd counted out her $20. Calder County stamped its name on everything official in Millbrook Hollow, and she was starting to learn the shape of that stamp. She read the notice twice. Then she folded it into her jacket beside the deed. A person who owns nothing learns to keep all her papers together. She went back inside to the work, because the work was the only answer she had ever found to anything. But the wall would not leave her alone, and neither would the cat. Boots had a vigil now. Every few hours he climbed to the second floor, sat in front of the cabbage roses at the dead end of the hall, stared. When Junie came up, he'd look at her, then back at the wall, then back at the wall again. The meaning of it was plain enough that she'd stop pretending not to understand. On the third afternoon, she gave in. She brought up the lantern, a putty knife, got down on her knees beside the cat, and started to read the wall with her fingers. The paper was newer than the paper everywhere else in the house. That was the first wrong thing. Everywhere else, the wallpaper had faded and curled and gone soft with age. This stretch was tight, whole, like it had been hung long after the rest, hung over something. She slid the putty knife under a seam, peeled. The paper came away in a long strip. Underneath was not plaster. Underneath were boards, wide pine nailed flat across the wall in a rectangle taller than she was, and around the edges of that rectangle a door frame. Someone had covered it on purpose, boarded shut, papered over, hidden from a house that had forgotten it was even there. She sat back on her heels. Her heart was going hard. Okay, she said to the cat. Her voice came out unsteady. Okay, you were right. She thought about Dalton's card on the rail, the notice in her jacket, the $10,000 she'd turned down without blinking. And for one cold moment, kneeling in that dim hallway, with a dead woman's tower rising up somewhere on the other side of these boards, Junie Hartwell wondered if she was about to find out exactly why this house had been sealed, and exactly why a man in a wool coat wanted it gone before anybody else got the chance to look inside. She fit the claw of Silas's pry bar into the first board, set her weight against it, and pulled. The first board came loose with a shriek of old nails that echoed all the way down the empty hall. The second came easier. By the time she'd pulled the fourth, she could see it. Not a wall, not a closet, a doorway. And beyond it, impossibly, though she should have known, though the tower rising over the whole town should have told her exactly what she'd find the bottom step of a staircase, curving up, into stone, into the dark, into the base of the lighthouse itself. The stairs went up into stone, and stone doesn't lie. Silas taught her that too. She stood at the bottom of them a long moment, lantern in one hand, pry bar still in the other, because some part of her wasn't ready to set it down yet. Because staircases don't just appear. Because a door doesn't get boarded shut and papered over for no reason. Except somebody had a reason. And that reason was standing right in front of her, curving up into a dark she couldn't see the top of. "Okay," she said again. To nobody. To Boots maybe, who had already gone up 3 steps and stopped to look back at her like she was the slow one. She went up. The stone was cold under her palm. Cool in a way the rest of the house wasn't, like the tower kept its own weather. The stairs spiraled tight, hugging the curved wall, and every 10 steps or so, there was a narrow slit of a window glass gone cloudy with age, letting in just enough gray light to keep the lantern from being the only thing standing between her and the dark. She counted the steps without meaning to. Old habit, 62, then a landing and a door. Not boarded, not papered, just a door painted a soft, faded blue that had once probably been bright with a porcelain knob gone yellow with age, same as the one downstairs had been before somebody sealed it away. She pushed it open, and the room breathed out at her. Dust, dry paper, chalk maybe. And underneath all of it, something that made no sense until it did. Small desks. A dozen of them, maybe more, arranged in careful rows like a schoolroom nobody had ever mentioned once in this entire ordeal. A slate chalkboard on the far wall, words still ghosted into it under decades of dust. A shelf of books with spines cracked soft from handling. Junie stood in the doorway and felt something crack open in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. "This isn't a lighthouse," she said out loud. To the empty desks. To the cat winding around her ankles like this was the most natural thing in the world. "This is a school." Except it wasn't. Not just a school. Because when she climbed higher, and she did climb higher because stopping was never really an option, not once her hands were already moving, the next landing gave her a room lined with cots. Narrow iron frames, blankets folded at the foot of each one, the kind of order that only comes from somebody who cared enough to make it neat, even when nobody was coming to check. And the room after that, a little infirmary glass bottle still lined up on a shelf, gone cloudy and dry, a chart on the wall marking growth. Not for one child, for dozens. She stood in the infirmary a long time, long enough that the lantern started to gutter, and she had to trim the wick with hands that weren't quite steady. Because this wasn't a haunted house. This was never a haunted house. This was a machine built for exactly one purpose, and that purpose was children. Running quietly, running invisibly, running for longer than Junie had been alive, tucked inside a tower that everybody in town had spent 12 years being too scared to look at twice. "Who were you?" she said to the stone, to the dust, to whoever had folded those blankets so carefully so many times for so many years. "Who were you, and why did nobody know?" Nobody answered. Boots had already moved on, tail flicking already 3 steps up toward whatever came next. She followed. The next landing was smaller. A workshop of all things, a bench along one curved wall, tools hung on pegboard in shapes that had been drawn around them, so nothing would ever go back in the wrong place. A block plane sat dead center, exactly like the one in her own hand, exactly like the one Silas had given her when she was 12 years old in a garage 200 miles away. Her breath caught. Because that couldn't be a coincidence. Except it had to be. Except tools like that were common enough, weren't they, in any workshop any decade? Except her hands were shaking now, and she didn't know why not yet. Not until much later, and that not knowing sat in her stomach like a stone all its own. She kept climbing. The last room at the very top was the one that took her breath entirely. Shelves, floor to ceiling, curving with the wall, and every one of them packed with small boxes. Shoebox size, some smaller. Hundreds of them. Each one labeled on the end in the same careful hand, a first name, a year, sometimes a question mark where a last name should have been. A desk sat under the tall window, the one that must have thrown the lantern light out over the whole town for 60 years. The glass here wasn't cloudy. It had been kept clean. Someone had painted it black on the inside, though careful even brushstrokes like whoever did it hadn't wanted a single beam of light escaping, which made no sense because the whole point of a lighthouse is the light. Unless the point had never been the light at all. Unless the point was that nobody could see in. On the desk sat a book, thick, bound in cracked black leather, and it was the only thing in that entire room without a full decade of dust settled into it because the dust that had been there had been wiped clean. More than once. The gloss of a thing that gets touched. Junie sat down in the chair where she understood now without being told a woman had sat for years. Alone, in the dark, with the window painted shut. She opened the book. At the top of the first page in ink, gone brown with age, The Children of the Light. Under that one line, and Junie read it twice before her throat let her breathe again. Every one of them was somebody's. We just kept the lamp burning until somebody remembered. Then the entries began. Short, a date, a name, sometimes only a first name, sometimes a first name, and a question mark where a surname should have gone. An age, a line, maybe two. Came in November, half rose 14. Said his daddy put him out, stayed the winter. Sent him to my sisters in Ohio come spring with a coat and $40. Then the next, page after page after page. Decade folding into decade in the same hand, getting shakier as the years climbed toward the present. Girls who came pregnant and scared and left with a plan. Boys the county had given up on entirely. Children left at the base of the tower in the dead of night with notes pinned to their coats, and every single note said some version of the same three words. Please, just for a while. Junie read until the lantern needed trimming again. Then she read more. Somewhere in the middle of the book, one entry stopped her cold. A girl's name. And under it, nothing but this. She never said a word the whole 8 months. She is safe now. That was the entire entry. She is safe now. Junie set the book down, pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until the burning behind them stopped. Because the house had not been haunted. The house had been a place that took in the children nobody else would. For 60 years, run by one woman who never told the town what she was doing because the town would have found some way to stop her. Augusta Reed had spent her whole life on kids the world had already thrown away, and when she got too old to take in any more, she hadn't bragged about it, hadn't built herself a monument. She had sealed it all into a tower, painted the glass black so nobody would come looking, and sat with it alone in the dark until she died. And the house had waited 12 years for somebody to find the door. If you're reading this, Junie whispered, flipping to the very back of the ledger, where a single folded sheet was tucked into the binding. The house found you. She unfolded it. The same hand, older, shakier. If you're reading this, the house found you. It does that. Don't ask me how. I stopped asking years ago. There's no money to speak of, so if that's what you climbed up here for, I'm sorry. What's here is better than money, and harder to keep. Keep the light burning. That's all. Keep the light burning. Junie sat in that chair a long time with the page in her hands and the cat warm against her leg. And for the first time since she was 12 years old, since a garage that smelled of linseed oil, since a man who put a scraper in her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, she felt like she had walked into a room and had the room get easier, not harder. She had bought this house thinking she'd gotten a roof for $20. She understood now she'd gotten something else entirely, and that it had weight to it, and that the weight had just become hers. She did not sleep that night. She read every page twice. In the morning, she went down the hill to find Thelma because she had to tell somebody or she would come apart at the seams standing still. Thelma took one look at her face across the salvage yard and set down whatever she'd been holding. "You found it," Thelma said. "Whatever it is, you found it." So Junie told her. In the back of the shop over coffee and a chipped mug that had seen better decades. The school, the infirmary, the workshop, the tower room with its blacked-out window and its shelves of small boxes, and the ledger that started with a promise and ended with a plea. Thelma listened. Her hands went white-knuckled around her own cup. Her eyes got wet and furious at the same exact time, which is a harder trick than it sounds. 60 years, she said when Junie finished. I knew some of it. Everybody my age knew a little. The way you know a thing you've all agreed not to look at straight on. She wiped her face with the heel of one hand. Rough. There was a boy in my class one year. Just 1 year. Then he wasn't. Nobody thought to wonder where a person goes. Why didn't she tell anyone? Junie asked. Why hide it? Because in the 60s, the county would have shut her down for running an unlicensed home, Thelma said. And in the 80s, they'd have done it for the same reason and she knew it. She shook her head slowly. Easier to be a ghost. A ghost can keep working. A do-gooder gets a visit from an inspector. The word landed between them like a dropped tool. There's a hearing, Junie said. 10 days now. Dalton Merrow wants the whole thing condemned, wants it gone. Thelma's face changed. Dalton Merrow's been trying to get that lot for 3 years, she said. Couldn't buy it outright because it was tangled up in back taxes. Couldn't get the county to condemn it fast enough because, frankly, nobody wanted to be the one who sent a wrecking crew up that hill. She leaned forward. And now you've made it easy for him. Teenager, no money, no lawyer. So what do I do, Junie said. I've got 10 days and $40. Thelma was quiet a moment. You let me think on it, she said finally. I've lived in this town 60 years. I'm owed a few favors I never called in. She reached across the little table, gripped Junie's wrist hard and brief. You're not the only one ashamed of how this town treated that woman. There's more of us than you'd guess. We just need a reason to stop being cowards about it. Why would you stick your neck out for me? Junie said. You met me 4 days ago. Thelma almost smiled. I'm not doing it for you, she said. I'm doing it for a dead woman I owe an apology to. And right now you're the closest thing to her this town has left. She picked her pen back up. Go home, she said. Keep that window lit. I'll come find you when I've got something. Junie went home with that sitting heavy in her chest and threw herself into the work with a new kind of fury. Scraping, hauling, shoring up boards that had gone soft. Because the work was the only thing that kept the fear from getting all the way in. She washed the black paint off the inside of the tower window first. That was the very first thing she did. It felt important, though she couldn't have said why. Not yet. That evening, the light in the tower window brought someone up the hill. She heard the car laboring up the bad pavement before she saw it and went out onto the porch with a flashlight, half expecting Dalton, half expecting the inspector come early to gloat. Instead, an old sedan stopped at the gate, and a woman got out slowly, silver-haired, leaning on a cane, wearing a good coat that had been good a long time ago. She stood at the broken gate and looked up at the lit window and put her free hand flat over her heart. Can I help you? Junie called down. That light, the woman said. Her voice shook. That light's been dark for years. I drove past for my sister's tonight, and I saw it on, and I had to... She steadied herself against the gate. I'm sorry, I had to come up. I lived here, the woman said. A long time ago, when I was a girl. Didn't have anywhere else, and she took me in. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. I never thought I'd see that window lit again. Junie came down the steps, helped her up the broken walk, brought her inside, sat her in the one good chair by the stove. The woman looked around the ruined hall, tears running down the lines of her face, and a smile living somewhere underneath them both. It was so warm in here, she said. You wouldn't think it looking at it now. There were always kids, always something cooking. She looked at Junie. How long were you here before you found her? Before you found what she left? I wasn't here at all, Junie said. I bought it 4 days ago, $20 at the county auction. The woman stared at her. Then she laughed, a wet, astonished sound. Of course you did, she said. Of course you did. That's exactly how it goes. She always said the house would find the next one. She caught Junie's hand in both of hers. Her grip was stronger than it looked. You're one of us. You just got here the long way around. What happened to her, Junie asked. At the end, the woman's face faded a little. She got old, same as everybody. Couldn't manage the stairs anymore. Couldn't take anybody in those last few years, and I think that broke her worse than her own body did. She looked toward the tower hidden somewhere above the ceiling. People saw her lamp in that window and crossed the street rather than climb up and ask why. I always meant to come myself. I never did. Her voice cracked. Don't let that window go dark again. Whatever you have to do, keep it lit. They talked until late. Before the woman left, Junie brought her up to the shelves of boxes, and the woman found her own name on one from decades back and could not speak for a long while. Inside was a photograph of a thin girl, a hair ribbon, a report card with every grade circled in red, and a note in that same careful hand. Stayed 2 years, scared of everything when she came, scared of nothing when she left. The proudest I ever was. She kept it, the woman whispered. All this time, she kept all of it. After she'd gone, Junie went back up to the tower room and kept reading because now she had a reason she hadn't had the night before. These weren't entries anymore. They were people, scattered across the years in the map, who had once been saved in this house by a woman the town had called a ghost. She started a list of her own on the back of an envelope. Names, last known towns, though she couldn't have said yet what she meant to do with it. It just felt wrong to let them stay lost a second time. She was deep into a run of entries from decades back 3 nights before the hearing when she found the one that stopped her cold. Longer than most. A girl 17 arrived in the dead of winter 8 months along and frightened half to death, sent quietly by a pastor 2 counties over, who knew where to send the ones with nowhere else. Stayed through the spring. Had the baby right there in the back bedroom with a doctor who never once charged Augusta a dime. Then a line that made Junie read it 3 times. Her people took her back once it was over. She married a hard man and never spoke of the year she lost. But I kept track, the way I keep track of all of them. Then added later in a hand grown older and shakier than the rest. That boy of hers grew up right here in this town and never knew where his first breath was drawn. He builds things now. Half the east side has his name on it. Junie sat very still, because she thought about a man in a good wool coat standing at the bottom of her porch steps, telling her his company had been putting this block back together for 3 years, telling her he was doing her a favor. She thought about the notice taped to her gate, the name on the white card she'd left sitting on the porch rail in the rain. She turned back to the page, read the last line again. He doesn't know. His mother carried it to her grave. But it's written here in case the day ever comes that somebody needs to give it back to him. The hearing was 3 days away, and the man who wanted to send a wrecking crew up this hill had taken his very first breath in the back bedroom of the house he was trying to tear down. And the only proof of it in the world was sitting in Junie's 2 hands. For 2 days she carried that page everywhere, folded in her jacket beside the deed beside the county notice. She thought about what it was, because it was a weapon. She understood that much clearly enough. A man who wanted her house torn down had been born in its back bedroom, and he didn't know it, and she was the only person alive who could prove it. She could walk into his office, lay the page on his desk, watch him understand that she could tell the whole town exactly where Dalton Merrow came from, that his hard, silent mother had spent one frightened winter as an unmarried girl in the house he now called an eyesore. She could make him stop. People had made her do things her whole life by holding the one card she couldn't beat, and now she was the one holding the card. She thought about it for 2 days. Then she decided she would rather lose the house than win it that way. She told Thelma about the tower, the boxes, the ledger. All of it except the part about Dalton's mother because that part wasn't hers to spend. Thelma listened. Then Thelma started making phone calls. And over those 2 days, something began to happen in Millbrook Hollow that nobody had planned. The silver-haired woman told her sister. Her sister told two more. And it turned out the town was full of people who had a thread running back to that hill if you pulled on it hard enough. A retired railroad man who'd been one of Augusta's boys decades back. A woman whose own mother had been taken in during a war Junie hadn't even been alive for. A retired school teacher who'd quietly sent children up that hill for years when there was nowhere else to send them. They had all carried their piece of it alone, half ashamed. And now somebody had washed the black paint off the window and lit the lamp, and one by one they came to find out it was real. They came up the hill in ones and twos those 2 evenings. People Junie had never met stopping at the broken gate the same way she had less than 2 weeks before. She brought them in, lit the lantern in the tower room, let them find their own names among the boxes, and watched grown adults come apart over a hair ribbon, a report card, a baby tooth wrapped in a twist of paper going soft with age. The railroad man held his box a long time without speaking. "I named my own daughter after her," he said finally. "Never told the girl why. Figured the story would make it sound like I came from nothing." He wiped his face with a flat hand. "I came from this. That's not nothing." A woman in her 70s found a photograph of herself at 9 years old, gap-toothed, in a dress Augusta had clearly sewn herself. "My grandkids think this house is where you go to get scared on a dare," she said. "I'm bringing them up here. They're going to know whose house it was." By the second night, there was a casserole on the kitchen counter that Junie hadn't bought, a box of work gloves by the door, a folded check tucked under the lantern with no name written on it anywhere. The house was waking up, and the town was waking up around it. The night before the hearing, Junie couldn't make her hands hold still. She'd faced down plenty of things alone: caseworkers, group homes, cold nights with nowhere to be. But she had never once stood up in a room full of adults and asked them for anything, because asking and getting told no was the one wound she had taught herself to stop opening a long time ago. Thelma found her on the porch at dusk, sat down heavy on the step beside her. "You don't have to be eloquent," Thelma said. "You just have to tell them the truth and let them look at you while you do it." "That sounds harder." "It is," Thelma said. "It's the only thing that ever works." Junie stared down at the lights of Millbrook Hollow scattered below the hill. So small from up here. So easy to imagine every single one of those windows had a thread running back to this house that nobody had ever bothered to pull. "And if they vote to tear it down anyway," she said, "then they do it in front of every single person who stood up for it," Thelma said. "And this town has to live with their own faces afterward." She patted Junie's knee once, firm. "Either way, you make them look." Junie folded the page about Dalton's mother back into her jacket next to the deed next to the notice. Above them, the tower stood black against a purpling sky, its lantern room glowing warm and gold at the very top. The only light on the whole hillside. "Keep the light burning. That's all." She meant to. Whatever happened tomorrow. The hearing was in a low county room with bad carpet and a long table at the front, and Junie got there early in her cleanest clothes, which were not clean enough. Sat in the front row, ledger and a canvas bag on her lap, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the weight of the paper. Dalton Merrow came in with the building inspector and a man in a suit she took for a lawyer. Sat at the front like the outcome was already arranged, which it likely was. He gave her a small nod, almost kind. He thought he was about to do her a favor she was too young to understand. The inspector read the violations first. A long flat list: failing porch, compromised roof, no certificate of occupancy, electrical and plumbing condemned years back. And the tower, he paused on the tower, glanced up at her once, like he still didn't quite believe what his own crew had reported structurally unaccounted for. No permits on file, ever. He recommended the structure be declared unsafe, scheduled for demolition, lot cleared at the owner's expense or the county's. Then Dalton stood, and he was good at this, easy, warm, reasonable. Nobody's the villain here, he said. That house is dangerous. A teenager bought it sight unseen for $20, and she can't possibly bring a 100-year-old lighthouse up to code. I'm not here to take anything from her. He spread his hands to the room. My company is prepared to cover the demolition, settle the back taxes, pay this young woman a fair price on top, so she walks away with money in her pocket instead of a debt she'll never climb out of. A pause timed perfect. That's not cruelty. That's mercy. Sometimes the kind thing is to let a thing go. Heads nodded. It sounded like mercy. It sounded like the only sensible end to a foolish story. The chairman looked down at her. Miss Hartwell, you're the owner of record. Do you have anything to say before we vote? Her legs did not want to hold her, but they did. I do, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, so she made it bigger. Mr. Merrow says I can't bring it up to code. He's right that I can't do it alone. He's right I don't have money. She lifted the ledger out of the bag, set it on the rail in front of her. But he doesn't know what that tower is. None of you do. I didn't either until last week. She opened it, read just a few. The boy who came half frozen and got sent to Ohio with a coat and $40. The girl who never spoke for 8 months and under her name only this she is safe now. Twins whose father drank, both grown men now both writing home every year. She read them flat, plain, no performance. And the bad carpet room went very, very quiet. Augusta Reed built a lighthouse 200 miles from any water, Junie said, because she lost a child to the sea before she ever came here, and she swore no child would ever be lost in the dark again while she had breath to keep a light burning. For 60 years, she took in this town's throwaway kids, the ones the county couldn't place, the ones who aged out with nothing like I did 3 weeks ago. She closed the book. She never asked for credit, never got any. You called her a ghost so you wouldn't have to call her anything else. She looked around the room. You can vote to tear that down, but you should know exactly what you're tearing down before you do it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then in the back, the silver-haired woman stood, leaning on her cane. I lived in that house, she said, voice ringing clear. I'd be dead or worse if she hadn't taken me in. I went to nursing school. I worked at the hospital half this town was born in. She looked around the room. I'm not a ghost story. I'm right here. The railroad man stood next. She fed me a whole year, asked nothing. His voice cracked. I never once told my own children where I spent it. I'm done being ashamed of the best thing that ever happened to me. A woman by the window stood. My mother was one of hers during the war. I'm standing here because that house stood there. A man by the door got to his feet, managed only a single year out loud before he had to sit back down, hand over his mouth. One after another, all over the room, people stood and said a year out loud, and the years ran back more than half a century, and the bad carpet county room filled up with the sound of a whole town saying plainly what it had only ever whispered. Dalton Merrow turned in his chair and watched the place. He thought he owned the whole story of Get to Its Feet around him. Junie turned to him. He'd gone very still, the smooth entirely gone out of his face. You can buy the lot, Mr. Merrow, she said quietly. You've got the money, I don't. But you can't buy what made it matter. That part was never for sale, and it never will be. The chairman called a recess. In the hallway, while the room buzzed behind them, Junie found Dalton standing alone by a window, and she made the choice she'd been carrying for 2 days. She took the folded page out of her jacket. This was in the tower too, she said. With the boxes. I thought about using it to make you stop. She held it out. But it isn't mine. It's yours. I think you should have it, whether you tear the house down or not. He took it with the wary hands of a man who'd been handed bad paper before. unfolded it. She watched him read, watched his eyes go down the entry once fast, then again slow, then stop entirely. "Where did you get this?" His voice had changed completely. "Augusta wrote it. She kept track of every child who ever passed through and where most of them ended up." Junie said it as gently as she had ever said anything in her life. "Your mother stayed one winter. She had you in that house in the back bedroom come spring." Dalton Merrow, who built half the east side, who had walked up her hill to do her what he thought was a favor, stood in a county hallway and read a dead woman's handwriting about his own mother, and his face came apart in pieces. "She had a year she never talked about," he said, slow. "My whole life. There was a year before she met my father, and if you ever asked her about it, she'd leave the room." He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "I thought it was something shameful. I built things my whole life trying to make up for whatever it was. I never knew." He looked down at the page again, like it might dissolve if he blinked. She was a kid. She was alone. And somebody took her in. "Somebody took her in," Junie said. "In the house you came here to knock down." He looked at her, and there was something almost frightening in it. A big, successful man entirely undone by 8 lines of a stranger's handwriting. "Why are you giving me this?" he said. "An hour ago, I was trying to take your house out from under you. Because it's true." Junie said, "Whether I stay angry at you or not. Because somebody once taught me a thing isn't ruined just because it's been left. Not a table, not a house, not a year of your mother's life nobody ever let her talk about." She nodded at the page in his hands. "That's yours. It always was. I just held on to it for you a while." For a long moment he couldn't speak. When he did, his voice was wrecked. "My mother had a year she never named her whole life," he said. "You just handed it back to her." He folded the page along its old crease, careful like the keepsake it already was. When the recess ended, Dalton Merrow stood up before the vote and withdrew his company's interest in the property entirely. Asked the county instead to grant the owner a repair timeline. Said his crews, his money were available to whoever was restoring that house on whatever terms the owner set. Said he'd cover the back taxes himself. Not to own it, only to keep it standing. The inspector, looking at a room full of witnesses and a developer who just reversed his entire position in front of all of them, recommended a full year to bring the structure to code instead of the wrecking ball. It passed. Nobody voted against a house the whole room had just stood up for. The back taxes came to a little over $4,000. 12 years of a house nobody had wanted. Dalton paid it the next morning in person at the same county window where Junie had counted out her $20 in ones and a 5 2 weeks before. He didn't ask for his name on a single piece of paper. As for Augusta's own money, the strongbox at the base of the tower held exactly what her note had promised, which was almost nothing. A roll of old coins worn smooth from handling. $40 in an envelope marked for the next one. A house, and the names of everyone it had ever saved. It had never been about money. It had only ever been about the light. Outside on the courthouse steps, Thelma found Junie and gripped her by both shoulders and couldn't say anything for a second because she couldn't. The silver-haired woman was crying and laughing at the same time. Strangers who'd stood up inside came to shake Junie's hand and hand her a year, a name, a piece of the house they'd carried alone for decades and could finally set down. That night, Dalton Merrow came up the hill. Alone. Old clothes, not the wool coat. Stood at the broken gate a long time before he came up the walk. Junie let him in. She had no power yet, but she had the wood stove she and Thelma had wrestled into the front room that afternoon, throwing real heat for the first time in 12 years. And she had candles, and up in the tower the window glowed gold over the whole town for anyone who cared to look. "Can I see it?" he said. The room. She took him up. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the walls of boxes. The small iron bed she'd found in one of the lower rooms and carried up herself. The desk under the window, black paint washed clean now, night showing through. She found his mother's box, handed it over without a word. There wasn't much in it. A hair comb, a hospital bracelet too small to be anything but a newborn's, a slip of paper with a way to length a date in spring. He sat down on the floor among 60 years of saved children, an old man in the dark, and took the things out one at a time, held each one like it might spill. Junie left him there. Some rooms a person needs to be alone in. Downstairs, she stood at the front window and looked out over the town spread below the hill. The same town that had crossed the street from this house for 12 years, running and 60 before that, if you counted Augusta's own silence. A few windows lit down there. She wondered how many of them had a thread running back up this hill nobody had ever bothered to pull. Through the floorboards overhead, she could hear the low, broken sound of a grown man crying in a house his mother had been safe in once before he was ever born, before anyone taught him to be hard. She did not feel like she had won anything. She felt like something very old had finally been allowed to rest. Dalton came down after a long while, holding the small box against his chest like it might spill. Eyes red. He didn't bother hiding it. He sat down across the stove from her, and for a man who'd walked up this hill the first day with a number already in his mouth, he had a hard time finding any words at all. "I want to help," he said finally. "Not buy it, not put my name on it. Help." He looked around the ruined front room, the stove, the candles, the cat curled by the fire. "Tell me what it's supposed to be, not what it was, what you want it to be." Junie had been turning that over for a week without saying it out loud. Now it came easy. "A place for the ones who age out with nowhere," she said. "Kids who turn 18 and get handed a folder and a list of shelters. There's no place for them. I know because 3 weeks ago I was one." She looked at him. "Augusta made this house that place for 60 years. I want to make it that again. I want to keep the light burning. That's the only rule. Whatever else changes, the light stays on." Dalton nodded slowly like she'd handed him a blueprint he could finally read. "Then that's what we build," he said. But it was Thelma who made it real. She came up the hill a few days later with a folder under her arm and set it down on the kitchen table. "You can't run a house full of children out of your back pocket at 18, she said. "Not legal, not safe, not for long." She tapped the folder. "So here's what we do. We make it a real thing, a foundation, a board, grown people who answer for it." She looked at Junie hard. "You run it, but you don't carry it alone, because that's the one mistake she made." Her voice caught on the last of it. "Augusta carried this house by herself for 60 years, she said. And this town let her. It near broke her. We are not doing that to you." So they made it real. The silver-haired woman who'd spent a career in a hospital and knew her way around paperwork took the legal end. Dalton put up the starting money, his name on none of it. Thelma put up herself. And Junie, who owned the house and the deed and the whole strange 60-year inheritance of it, signed the line as the one who would keep the door open. That winter tested every promise any of them had made. The crews Dalton sent up put a new roof on the main house first and rebuilt the stairs to the tower so nobody would break a neck climbing them, and ran wire that finally made the word electricity mean something in that house again. But there was a stretch deep in January when the starting money ran thinner than anyone wanted to say out loud, and a hard freeze caught the new pipes before they'd been properly wrapped. Junie found the leak at 6 in the morning, standing in 2 inches of icy water in the cellar, holding a flashlight with a battery already going yellow. For about a minute, she let herself feel 18, let herself feel alone, let herself believe just for that minute that the whole town had been right about this house from the very start, and she'd been a fool with $20 and a dead man's tools to think otherwise. Then she heard the front door bang open upstairs. "Boots on the steps!" Thelma's voice sharp and already giving orders before she'd even made it down the cellar stairs. The railroad man's voice right behind hers. Somebody had noticed the lantern burning in the tower at that hour and known exactly what it meant and called somebody else the way news of trouble had started to travel up that hill instead of away from it. By noon, there were 6 people down in that cellar with a shop heater and a torch, and the pipes were saved, and somebody nobody would say who had brought soup. This is the part the ghost stories never told. Thelma said, pushing a bowl into Junie's hands. Takes a whole town to haunt a house. Takes a whole town to unhaunt one, too. That was the difference Junie thought between Augusta's 60 years and her own first one. Augusta had done it in secret, alone, in the dark with the window painted black so no one would ever see her struggling. Junie got to do it with the lights on and people who came running when the pipes froze. The work was the same work. She just didn't have to carry it by herself. And that changed everything about how heavy it weighed. By the time spring came, you would not have known it for the same house. Dalton's crews had finished the roof and made the wiring and plumbing honest at last. But they worked alongside people who weren't on anybody's payroll, and that was the part that mattered most. The railroad man turned out to know stonework, and he rebuilt the porch steps with his own two hands. A retired electrician spent his Saturdays running new circuits and refused every dollar offered for gas money. Thelma emptied half her salvage yard up that hill period doors, a clawfoot tub, a farmhouse sink, all of it priced at nothing at all. Junie did the finish work herself. Every door and window and stair tread Silas's plane in her own two hands, and the house came back under her fingers the same way that wrecked little side table had come back to her when she was 12 years old. Grain by grain, coat by coat. The thing about ruin, she'd learned, was that it was almost never as deep as it looked. Underneath it, the bones were usually still good. They just needed somebody willing to do the work. The tower window got new glass, clear glass, and every night Junie left a lantern burning in it. People in town had spent 12 years crossing the street from a dark window they called a ghost. Now there was a warm one at the top of the hill, and slowly they got used to looking up instead of away. Somebody left a cord of split firewood at the gate with no note. The diner downtown started sending up the day's last pie no charge because the owner had been one of Augusta's kids decades back and had never told a living soul either. She had bought a haunted house for $20. What she'd actually bought, it turned out, was a whole town's one chance to make something right. And once they understood that, they took it with both hands. They came on a Sunday in May, the ones who could. Thelma had spent 2 months tracking them down, working from the names in the ledger, and the list Junie had started on the back of an envelope, calling old numbers and writing letters and following threads across 40 years in a dozen states. More than 30 of them came back to the house on the hill that Sunday, gray-haired most of them, some with their own grown children in tow. They walked through the rooms where they'd once been children and put their hands on the door frame in the back hall, the one scarred top to bottom with pencil marks, and found the lines that belonged to them. Junie watched a man in his 60s show his daughter a mark 4 feet off the floor, his own name beside it, and watched the daughter understand all at once exactly where her father came from. She had brought the boxes down from the tower and laid them out along the long kitchen table, everyone, and she gave them back. People found their own and held them and cried and held strangers and cried over those too. The silver-haired woman moved through the crowd like the host of it, which in a way she was. Dalton stood off to the side a long time with his mother's box. Then he cleared his throat in that loud, crowded room and told them all who his mother had been and where he had taken his first breath, and that he'd spent 50 years ashamed of a thing that turned out to be the kindest year of a frightened girl's life. He said it so that nobody else in that room would ever have to be ashamed of it again. There were reunions in that house all afternoon that Junie would carry the rest of her life. A man found the box of a brother who hadn't lived long enough to come back, and his sister carried it out to her car like something newborn. They ate together in the big kitchen that had been built to feed a crowd, and for the first time in over a decade it did. Nobody renamed the house. Somebody suggested a plaque. Junie said no. It was the Reed House. It had always been the Reed House, and the woman it was named for had never wanted a single word of credit while she was alive. She wasn't going to get a brass sign now that she was gone. The only thing that changed was the window. It stayed lit. The first child came in October, almost a year to the day after Junie herself had climbed that hill with 2 garbage bags and nowhere to go. Thelma brought him up in her truck. 16. All sharp shoulders and watchful eyes, 1 bag of clothes in his lap, and a chip on him you could have split kindling on. He stood at the broken gate which Junie had left broken on purpose because every single one of them stood at that gate first. "This the haunted house," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "That's what they used to call it," Junie said. "Name's Junie." "What do I call you?" "Micah." He looked up at the tower window lit gold against the coming dark. "Somebody said there's a place to stay." "There is." She came down the walk to him. "It's not fancy. You make your own bed. You do your own dishes. There's school in the morning whether you like it or not. Cat's named Boots. He's mean to mice and decent to people who feed him." She stopped in front of the boy. "You stay, you eat. That's the whole deal. It's the only one I've ever known how to offer anybody." "What's the angle?" Micah said. "Nobody gives a bed away for nothing." "Somebody gave me one," Junie said. "A woman who used to live here. I never met her. She'd been gone 12 years by the time I turned up, and she still found a way to leave the light on for me." She lifted one shoulder. "So I keep it burning. That's the whole angle. You'll spend a while waiting for it to turn into something worse. It won't. That's just the part you have to live here long enough to believe." Micah looked at her like he was waiting for the catch. Because there's always a catch when you've lived a life that puts a 16-year-old at a broken gate with one bag of clothes. Junie knew that look from the inside. So she didn't push. She just stepped back and held the gate, and after a long moment, the boy picked up his bag and came through it. That night, on her own way to bed, she found his door open a crack. Boots had let himself in, stretched out across the foot of the boy's bed, and Micah was already asleep with one hand resting in the cat's fur, the same as she had slept that first cold night on the parlor floor. The cat had always known which ones needed him. The next morning, she found Micah on the second-floor landing, looking at the door frame full of names. "Who are all these people?" he asked. "Everybody who ever lived here," Junie said. "Kids, mostly. Going back almost 70 years. He ran his thumb over a faded line, a name he couldn't quite read. "And you," he said, "where's yours?" She hadn't put it there. She'd measured 100 other people's marks against that frame and never once stood against it herself. She thought about it now. Went and got the pencil that lived on the kitchen sill for exactly this reason. Stood with her back to the frame. Had Micah draw the line over the top of her head. Write the date. "There," she said. "Now there's mine." Micah looked at her line on the frame, then at all the others stacked above and below it. Decades of children who'd stood exactly where he was standing now. Something in his shoulders came down half an inch. He was a long way still from believing he belonged on a wall full of names. But he'd drawn the line himself in his own hand, and every single person on that door frame had started in that exact spot with somebody older handing them a pencil. Junie had spent her whole life believing home was a thing other people had and kept from her. A door that opened for everyone but her. It had taken a dead woman a lighthouse 200 miles from any water and $20 to teach her otherwise. "Home isn't the place that keeps you," she told the boy, and she wasn't sure she'd known it was true until she heard herself say it out loud. "It's the place you decide to keep." Micah didn't say anything, but he stopped looking like he was waiting for the catch. That night, Junie walked the house before bed the way she did every night now. Checking the doors, banking the stove, Boots trailing her down the dark hall. She climbed to the tower room last and stood at the window where Augusta had sat alone in the dark for so many years, glass painted black, so no one would ever see her. The paint was long gone. The glass was clear. Below her, the town lay scattered in its own small lights. And up here, one more light burned where the whole hillside could see it. She trimmed the lamp, left it burning, the way she would do every single night for a long, long time to come. Nobody had ever left Junie Hartwell anything but a key and a price tag. She spent the rest of her life making sure that was never the end of anybody else's story.